Good afternoon. Well, here we are after a nerve-wracking but highly successful first live webinar back in March, when we were joined by Lorraine Martins, who was at the time the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Network Rail, and my good friend Sharon Amesu, founder of She Leads for Legacy, which is a professional network for Black professional women in the Northwest, and also a consultant on the subject of inclusive leadership. I am absolutely delighted to welcome you all to our second knowledge session, which is focusing today on workplace belonging. The event itself, we've got Alex Hynes, Managing Director of Scotland's Railway, and DDS Dobson-Smith, who, amongst many, many different skills and talents, is a workplace culture specialist and former Eurostar and Crossrail leader. We're going to explore the hot topic of how transport can attract and retain the amazing talent that is out there in underrepresented communities. We'll take the subject of equality, diversity and inclusion a step further, looking at the concept of belonging and how this has a critical impact on workplace performance and, critically, talent pipelining. We have a skills shortage. We have an issue across the UK, not just in the transport sector. So there are other communities that are underserved, actually, by organisations looking to bring talent into their workplace. We'll have a fireside chat, so I'll do a quick intro to our guests shortly, but then that will be followed up with a conversation with DDS, who will explain more about the book that was the catalyst for us planning today's live webinar. After the fireside chat, Alex will share some information about what's happening in Scotland in terms of D&I. And then after a short comfort break, we're going to reconvene to talk specifically about recruitment and talent pipelining. What can organisations do to ensure that they are reaching every different community that's out there in terms of attracting talent into this amazing sector that we work in. After the comfort break, we'll do the recruitment specific discussion, and then we will have a live Q&A. I'm encouraging you to put your questions in the chat. We will be collecting them. We've got our Caroline Wilson, Mrs. Recruiter, is looking after the chat this afternoon, and we'll be collating your questions so that we can put those questions to DDS and Alex in our live Q&A. I would really encourage you to stay around for that session, because in my experience, that's where a massive amount of learning happens. Listening to the questions that other people put forward, the answers from our expert guests, as well as having the opportunity to ask questions yourself. So why are we here? How did this come about? Well, earlier this year, Alex shared a post on his social media about a book he was reading. He was away on holiday, and he shared a photograph of this book. And I am an absolute addict to a book recommendation, especially from a trusted source like Alex. And so I ordered it, read it within a day. And it is without a doubt one of the most accessible books that I have come across on the subject of diversity and inclusion, without a doubt. There are loads and loads of books on the subject, and my bookshelves are filled with them in my office. But I don't do well with a textbook. I prefer a book which is written in a much more accessible way that doesn't sound like an academic paper, but is easy to read, easy to digest. And this book is that book. So it's easy to understand. I could easily relate to it. The other big difference for me, that it went into an area which I hadn't really noticed very much information coming through in relation to the practical, how do we do this? So for a number of years now, we've had all sorts of different reports, different books, different white papers, etc., telling us about why we should be building an inclusive and diverse workforce. This book takes it a step further, and it talks to us about the how. There are some really great ideas in here, case studies from people who have been successful in their own organisations, as well as case studies from people who are sharing their own lived experience, which helps me as an ally for different groups of people understand what it's like to be different in a different way to me. So there's loads of how, and that's really what today's session is all about. I really wanted to have the opportunity to share that information. It's just be amazing to spread the word into our community rather than keep it to myself. And hence the idea then to invite DDS to be our special guest. I was over the moon when he first of all just accepted my invitation to a Teams call. We had a conversation, and I was absolutely delighted when he said he would love to join us for this webinar. My thanks to DDS for joining us, but also it would have been remiss of me to have missed Alex out on this, bearing in mind it was him that recommended the book in the first place. And so I gave Alex a call a few weeks ago, asked him whether he could find time in his very busy diary to join us. And he was very, very positively accepted the invitation too. So we've got two very special guests, very knowledgeable people to share their experience with us today. So some quick introductions. Amongst many skills and talents, DDS is a published author, an executive coach, a speaker on inclusive leadership and growth, and a licensed therapist, as well as being a rail industry veteran, having worked for Eurostar for 7 years and Crossrail for 3. In the spirit of us all bringing our whole selves to the webinar, then share some personal stuff. DDS is a husband to Davis. He's an adoring owner of 2 Maine Coon cats, Harper and Hemingway, and lives, although lived in England, was born in England, he now lives in Connecticut in the USA. So it's morning for DDS. Alex is Managing Director of Scotland's Railway, so he's here representing both ScotRail and Network Rail in Scotland, having emigrated north of the border in 2017. So he's originally from Manchester. Alex now enjoys living in Perthshire on the banks of Loch Tay with his husband and their 2 greyhound rescue dogs, Sasha and Henry. Alex is also the executive sponsor of Archway, which is the employee network set up by Network Rail, but which is open to all of the train operating companies, the supply chain and rail delivery group employees, which started off in 2013 with 22 people and now has over 1,100 members and is doing some amazing stuff in the transport industry. As for me, I'm Nina Lockwood. I am the very proud founder of Intuitive Talent Solutions. We're a boutique recruitment consultancy which focuses on providing clients in the UK transport sector with talented individuals for senior, permanent and interim roles. Although born in North Wales, I moved to Lancashire as a babe in arms, and as you could tell from my accent, there is no doubt that I am a northern lass. I live with my husband and our 2 dogs, Darcy and Lottie, and enjoy occasional visits from my daughter and her washing, who's just finished her first year at Leeds University. My colleague Caroline is helping us out behind the scenes, as I say, and will be managing the chat box and any questions that come through. And thankfully, hugely grateful to our fabulous marketing agency Workshop, who are on hand to help us with the technical side of things and in whose office I am basing myself today, just in case any technical issues happen, because I'm completely incapable of sorting anything like that. Before we get cracking, I would like to invite each and every one of you to fully participate in the session today by bringing your curiosity to the virtual room. This is a safe space where we encourage you to be curious and to ask questions with the intent to learn. There's no such thing as a daft question, and all questions asked with genuine curiosity and willingness to learn will be very, very welcome. The Q&A session later is open to all, and any questions which we don't have time to cover this afternoon will be answered and then updated and posted at a later date. So my request of you is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable today. Let's have this as an opportunity where we can ask the questions about subjects which we're curious about, we perhaps don't understand. I know I've certainly got a few of those. But we can be in this environment, in the knowledge that we're all here to learn and to be educated, and to have that opportunity to then pass that learning on to other people who weren't able to join us on the webinar today. So let's get going. I'm going to introduce DDS very shortly, or bring him into the webinar. But I guess just to set the scene in terms of my own experience around belonging. In my previous career in financial services, I worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland, and I had the opportunity at a relatively young age to head up to Edinburgh, to work in head office, to be part of a team which was charged with leading a major culture change throughout the branch network. This was my first real understanding of my own personal need to belong. It became apparent quite quickly when I landed in St Andrew's Square that I was a little bit different to other people who worked in the office. I was English, I had a very distinctive northern accent. I was a woman in a relatively senior role. I was 24 years old, so I was quite a bit younger than the majority of my colleagues. I had no degree education, I still don't. I have O-levels, which is the first sign of age that I'll share with you today. And having lived in the same town in Lancashire for my whole life, I was then living and working in the capital city of Scotland. It's quite different. These differences were not necessarily welcomed by everybody I worked with, and this was a new experience for me. So when I read DDS's book and first came across the concept of diversity plus inclusion equals belonging, this really struck a chord with me and helped me to understand how to relate my own need for belonging with that of other folk who've got different backgrounds and experiences, and how belonging really is the next step on from diversity and inclusion. So let's start there. Let's bring DDS into the conversation. Hello.
Hi, Nina.
What a joy to have you here, an absolute joy. You know how grateful I am to you, and you also know how much I enjoyed your book, because I think I've told you about 100 times over the last few weeks, and I will keep waving it at various points during today's webinar. Diversity plus inclusion equals belonging. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, first of all, I want to, just listening to your introduction and talking about me and talking about the book, just want to say thank you for the opportunity. But also, it's very, very surreal to hear that something that started out as a passion project for me and was an academic paper that got turned into a book that feels so accessible to you. It boggles my mind, honestly. But anyway, I know that's not what you asked. So the diversity plus inclusion equals belonging is the equation that I write about in the book. And it would also be remiss of me if I didn't credit that the kernel of that idea came from a colleague of mine that I was working with some years ago. And it was through a woman called Kalpita Patel, who I adore, and nobody on this call will know her, but I think it is really important when we're talking about inclusion and belonging to make sure that people are attributed for their ideas.
Absolutely.
and that we don't steal work from people and ideas from people, which I know is commonplace experience for women to feel. Oftentimes, women will talk about the experience they have of men repeating their ideas and taking credit for it. So I am not going to do that. So thank you, Kalpita. The idea that diversity plus inclusion equals belonging is really this, that diversity is a fact, and it is binary in that your organization, your team either is or is not diverse. And a very quick litmus test is, when I look around, do I see people who are like me, and do I see people who are not like me? And if you can answer yes to both of those questions, then you've probably got a relatively diverse working space. Diversity is not enough. right? Diversity is not enough to lead towards this experience of belonging. What you then need once you've got diversity is the behavior of inclusion. And I talk about behavior as both being the behavior of the organization, i.e. the policies, the programs, the platforms, the processes that an organization deploys as it's going about its business. And then the behavior of the people in the organization. And very, very specifically, the behavior of people in senior positions in an organization, because I've long time said that the culture of any organization will be shaped by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate in a leader. So if you have diversity, and then if you add into that the behaviors of inclusion, then we get to a place of belonging. And it is that experience of belonging, the idea that when I walk into a place, and I'm sure everybody on this call has had an experience in their life, probably more than one, when they've walked into a place and they felt it in their bones that they do not belong there. They felt the vibe, and they've felt it in their body, they've felt it in their emotions, and realized that where they are is not where they should be, and have made haste to exit. Equally, I'm pretty certain that that everyone has also experienced belonging. The moment when you walk into a place, or you have an experience where you're like, oh yeah, these are my people, this is my place. I feel I have an experience of psychological safety, and which I talk about in the book is is the experience that we have when it's not expensive to be ourselves. And so diversity plus inclusion equals belonging. You can't have belonging if you don't have inclusion. You can't have inclusion if you don't have diversity. But you can have diversity without inclusion, yeah. Right? So that's why I say diversity is not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's bringing to mind a quote, and I'm falling right into the trap here because I can't remember the name of the lady who to attribute the quote to. So I will do some research and I will add that into the links. But there was a quote around diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance.
Oh,
and I've heard so many examples. I was very privileged to have lunch a few years ago, just before the pandemic stopped such a thing, with a fabulous group of people who were all senior women, all from the transport industry, not just rail, but different elements of the transport industry. And some of the examples that they were sharing with me blew my mind in terms of the behaviour that still exists around, for example, well, they're all executive directors, so there is a box being ticked there because their organisations can all say, well, yes, we have at least one woman on our board, and in some cases more. But what was happening, without exception, they all had the same experience, and this kind of came out in the conversation, that they would go to meetings and it became apparent that the agenda and any key items on the agenda that needed debate or discussion had already been debated and discussed, and a consensus reached amongst their male colleagues before it was then brought to the table, and a decision was announced because the discussion had already been held. I think when we kind of talk about the inclusion being the behaviour of people, and yes, the policies and the procedures are key, but the behaviour of senior people within an organisation is so fundamental to what's going to happen for us to get to that belonging stage. So if that's an example of how not to behave as a senior person who wants to encourage inclusion in the workplace, what are the good stuff, the good things that you're seeing with organisations that you've been involved with and worked with? What would we class as some quite straightforward best practices that senior leaders could be doing?
I mean, there is one that I often tell to senior leaders that, you know, the quickest way to kill creativity is to let the leader speak first.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you want to kill creativity, right? And sometimes the leader purposefully does speak first in order to influence the room in a certain direction. But whatever it is that the leader says or does is then how the room follows. So you better be jolly well careful about how you're having the room follow. And so it can be really simple as keeping an eye. You know, if you are a leader and you're sitting around a meeting room table or a boardroom table or whatever environment it is that you're in, whether it's virtual or physical, pay attention to who speaks first. Pay attention to who speaks most. Pay attention to who's getting credit, and pay attention to who you call on and what you call on them for. And just pay attention to that and just notice if there are any patterns that are emerging for yourself. I've seen it 25 years in a career. I've seen, you know, I've facilitated workshops, I've facilitated boardroom offsites, and oftentimes it will be a man that speaks first and most. It will be a white person that speaks first and most. It will be a straight person that speaks first and most. It will be someone who is not disabled that speaks first and most. And so I as the facilitator, you as the leader, have a really powerful role and a really influential role to turn that around and to invite people into the conversation, to make sure they not only that they have a seat at the table, but they are given that the room is created for them to use the voice that they have at the seat of that table. So it's just a really simple thing that we can do is just pay attention at the level of process versus the level of content when you're in a meeting.
Yeah, and that just speaks volumes to me in terms of that level of awareness that somebody can have within that environment. That being aware of what other people have to contribute. If they're not contributing, being sensitive enough to know how to enable them to contribute. There's a few things that's coming up here that's kind of taking me into an area that you mentioned earlier, DDS, around psychological safety.
Yes.
Now, I know that this is an area that Alex feels really passionate about. So, Toby, can I ask you to bring Alex back into the discussion? I feel like we've sat him in the naughty corner somewhere, so I think we need to get him back on the screen, as long as he's not gone off and he's not walking the dogs on the shores of Loch Tay. So psychological safety, the example that you've just shared, DDS, around people being in that meeting environment and feeling that they are being encouraged, enabled, supported to contribute. That, for me, would be a sign of psychological safety. Now, I'm keen to understand, because it's a relatively new phrase, is this. Maybe for the last 3 or 4 years, it's been appearing in conversations, but it's still relatively new. And it would really help me if I could understand what your definition of psychological safety is. And then if I can bring Alex in as well in terms of what it means for you, Alex, in that kind of day-to-day practical term as a leader of an organisation.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it might be a word that is being used with more frequency now, but it was actually a term that was coined in the 1960s. It was first published in the 1960s. And from my perspective, psychological safety is the experience that we have when it's not expensive to be ourselves. And when we are experiencing psychological safety, we are more likely to be able to say things like, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I need help, I don't know. Or we're more likely to be able to say things like, I have an idea, or I think there's a better way of us doing this. And I think psychological safety is also as a rail industry veteran, I know how important health and safety is, and I think psychological safety can be directly correlated to physical safety on the railways. And I think it was really interesting, Nina, for you to. I heard you say at the beginning of the webinar, this is a safe space, and I want to encourage people to stop using that term, because I don't think anybody can lay claims to a space being safe just by saying it's a safe space. We have to behave in ways that encourage and facilitate people's psychological safety. What we can do instead of saying this is a safe space, we can say we want this to be an intentionally brave space, where that you can feel the discomfort, that you feel that you can that you're not necessarily feeling wholly comfortable with what you're about to say and what you're about to do, but that you feel the fear and do it anyway, and that is met with the care and empathy and the behaviors that are needed to encourage that experience of psychological safety.
That's such a good point, because just because you say it doesn't make it so.
It does not.
So a really good point. And this word, all three words actually, intentionally brave space, where we can have that. I heard this expression a couple of years ago about accepting the need to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And to just, I guess, put ourselves in that position of needing to be brave, because I may ask a question that could feel inappropriate. It could feel like I've worded it wrong. Maybe I should understand that already, and I don't. So it's kind of all of that stuff which might prevent me from asking, but also then prevents me from being educated and understanding. Alex, psychological safety from your perspective, in your day-to-day role as MD in Scotland, what does it mean to you?
Well, one of the reasons why I loved reading this book, apart from the fact I was on a sun lounger in Lanzarote, it's a positive backdrop, isn't it, to read a book, is we've been dealing a lot with how we get everyone home safe every day, whether that's the public, the passengers, or the workforce. And one of the things that prevents companies being safer than they should be is that often people won't speak up, even when they feel that they should. And so we've been working with, experts in this field and companies, and they talk about this concept of psychological safety. And it's only when people feel psychologically safe will they speak up. And I've said to them on numerous occasions, the problem with this phrase, psychological safety, is normal people don't use that language. If you talk to a driver or a conductor or a signaller about psychological safety, they won't know what you mean, because it's actually quite a complex, academic, highfalutin term. So actually, if you're going to make progress on this agenda, actually turning it into a practical language that everyone can resonate, that human beings use, was really good for me. So we know people feel psychologically safe when they say those things. I don't know, I've made a mistake, I've got a concern, you're right, I've got an idea, etc., etc. So that, for me, resonated because it's describing the circumstances in which we can create these psychological safe environments. So, for example, at the end of every meeting I chair, I always say, okay, how do we do? And in the first meeting, the sort of tumbleweed goes through the meeting, doesn't it? Because no one wants to tell the chair that actually the meeting was a bit crap and we didn't allow enough time for this bit on the agenda or what have you. But actually, over time, people will give you positive, feedback because they feel safe. But there's a direct correlation between trust and organisational performance. And that's one reason why I feel so passionate about equality, diversity, inclusion, belonging, is not just because of the legal, moral, ethical arguments for pursuing this agenda. But actually, this is about good business. If we want to be profitable, if we want to delight our customers, if we want engaged employees, if we want safe, if we want to deliver a boring, reliable railway, actually we need to create an environment where everyone can come to work and be their best self. That's why I'm doing this. And one of the things I loved about this book is it bridged the ED&I agenda with other agendas like safety. That's really clever. That's one reason why I love this book.
Thank you. So DDS, do you want to having kind of listened to Alex's take on it, is there anything else that you can add to that in relation to when you've seen this working really well in organisations to get people to that point where they trust the organisation or the leadership within the organisation enough to bring their whole self to work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would imagine what Alex didn't say, and Alex wouldn't say this because Alex is just a very kind person and humble, is that how Alex responds to someone at the end of his meet. I've never been in a meeting with Alex, by the way, but I can imagine that when Alex says, "How did we do?" at the end of the meeting, and somebody eventually says, "Well, that was a bit crap," how Alex responds to "that was a bit crap" will have been the difference that made the difference as to when anybody else will speak up after that. Right? So our ability to take feedback is directly correlated to somebody's willingness to offer it. And so when we are creating a psychologically safe space, we have to be prepared to be wrong. We have to be prepared to be told we're wrong, and we have to be prepared to take accountability for our wrongdoing. So if somebody says, "That was a bit crap, Alex," and I noticed a time when you spoke over me, Alex can't go, "No, I didn't." Well, or worse, can't say, "Well, I didn't mean to." It's like this idea of valuing impact over intention. Like if I'm standing in the queue at Sainsbury's, which I haven't done for many years because I don't live in the UK anymore, but if I'm standing in the queue at Sainsbury's and someone runs their trolley into my ankles, and I look around and go, "Ouch," and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that," I go, "Oh, well, if you didn't mean to do it, all of that pain in my ankle has gone away. We're good, thanks very much." Of course, that's not the way it is. So when somebody says, "Oh, ouch, you trod on my metaphoric toes," or "You hurt my feelings," or "I didn't like the way you said that," you can't say, "Well, I didn't mean to," because that doesn't undo the wrongdoing. What you say, you take accountability for the impact of your behavior, and you say, "Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I didn't realize that I did that. Now I know I'm not going to do it again." And so if Alex isn't prepared to be wronged or to have his behavior or his process or the way he chairs a meeting called into question, then he's never going to get feedback from anyone. And that is exactly the same. So psychological safety is something that you build over time and can be broken in an instant, just like trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I come in here on something which you were talking about earlier, about the way to kill creativity is for the most senior person to speak first?
Yeah.
So we just recruited a new COO for ScotRail called Joanne Maguire, and she's absolutely fantastic. And one of the reasons why I love working with her is because I'm learning from her. And I've worked for lots of great leaders and lots of rubbish ones as well. And you learn as much from the rubbish ones as you do as the great ones, don't you? And I worked with a guy called Mike Hodson, who was the managing director of London Midland. And in an exec meeting, and we would discuss papers and stuff, he always spoke last. He would gather feedback from around the table and he would speak last, and then he would sort of sum up and moved on. And Joe was telling me the other day about the hippo And I said, what do you mean about the hippo? And she said, the highest paid person's opinion.
Ah.
Okay.
And
Right.
most meetings, if allowed, will default to the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. And the trick of leadership and inclusion and all that good stuff is not allowing the hippo to dominate. Because more often than not, that is not the outcome you want.
And there are times when you do want the hippo, right? Like if the hippo can step in and bring a spotlight to inequitable or exclusionary behaviors, that's a really great moment when the hippo can use their power, right? So it's like, I guess that's where I'm going with the be intentional. Know what your voice does and use your voice in a way that is going to bring about the greatest impact, the most helpful impact.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was reading something earlier today, one of the industry journals in the rail staff. They're talking about diversity and inclusion. There's some great articles in there, this issue from various different people in the rail network. And one of there was kind of a list of ideas to think about. And one of them was pass the mic. It doesn't always have to be you.
Yep.
So when you're in the meeting, I think there is a tendency, because it's kind of, well, it's your meeting. If you're chairing it, it's your meeting. If you're the leader, if you're the most senior person, if you're the hippo in the room, then there is a kind of natural tendency to think, right, okay, well, we'll all wait for you to speak then. So this is really valuable stuff. And the really great word that you're using, DDS, which is really kind of striking a chord with me, is this word intentional. It's being intentional. And yes, I didn't mean to. Well, okay, but let's just kind of rewind on that and say, well, how would that have gone differently then? Because you didn't mean to meant you weren't thinking about it and you weren't being intentional. So having that acceptance that different people in the room have got different needs, and we need to be really thinking about our communication rather than just assuming we can just kind of hurtle through as we've always done. We need to think about it more. And also, I think what's coming out as well for me is that ability to be able to say respectfully, that wasn't appropriate. That didn't work for me. When you said that, or you said that in this way, feeling that I have got the opportunity and the position within that environment to be able to put my hand up and say, it didn't work for me. This is how that made me feel within that particular situation. But I think it's so challenging, because as a society, that giving and receiving feedback is not necessarily a skill that we're taught. So how do you learn how to do that? How do you get good at that?
Go for it, Alex.
Well, I think some of it comes from confidence. So if you are confident in your ability, you are much more likely to ask for feedback and be prepared to listen to what that feedback says. So I think confidence is really important. So, for example, I'm a massive fan of making sure that leaders and managers are qualified in leadership and management, which might sound a novelty. And in rail, I think it still is a novelty. So the way we keep the railway safe is that we have drivers and signallers who are both competent and confident to do their roles. But actually, what I find in rail is we have a lot of people that I call accidental managers. And they're great people, and they've often done a practical task, and then we make them a manager, and then we wonder why they're not amazing. And the reason is we've never actually trained them to be amazing. We've not given qualifications in leadership and management. And, how many meetings of senior people like me sat around and moaned about the frozen middle in organisations and stuff like that. Well, if even if that was true, actually senior management has created that environment because leaders and managers aren't confident in their own ability. And then the other thing is practice. So, I've just recently been through a 360 exercise, and even though I've been through it many, many times before, and it's a fantastic management tool if you've never done one before, actually when you read it in black and white, it's really hard to read that stuff about yourself in black and white, and you go, oh God, yeah, I know I do that. I know sometimes I give feedback in WhatsApp and I shouldn't. And it requires confidence. So how do you make people confident? Well, one of the ways you can do that is through experience, but the other thing is, are we training and qualifying our leaders and managers to be brilliant leaders and managers? Not always.
Yeah, I think I would add to those 2 points a little bit, and ask you to consider, who are you giving this feedback for? Are you giving it for yourself in order to prove a point, or to slap back, or to expel your own feelings, or are you actually giving it for the other person? And if you're giving it for the other person, is what you're giving worth having? And we often talk about feedback is a gift, and yet it generally doesn't. It often feels like a pile of poop rather than a gift. And it can be a gift if you are giving it to someone in a way that is going to be useful to them. And I always advocate for people to seek consent before giving feedback. So I'd like to offer you some feedback about a situation that we were just in together. Would that be okay? And if the other person says, actually, no, not right now, then you just jolly well don't give the feedback, because that individual will not be ready to hear it. And if they say, no, I don't want to hear it, you say, well, it's really important for our working relationship that I offer you this feedback. So please let me know when you're ready to hear it.
Yeah. It's so important, isn't it? That kind of skill of understanding where the need is. Do I need to give you this feedback because actually if I don't, I feel like my head's going to blow off because I'm worked up, I'm frustrated, and whatever emotions are going on. So I need to give it to you. But I also need, as you've explained, I need to have that respect that, is this a good time? Is it going to land? Right. Because if I give it you as a gift and it's all beautifully wrapped, that's one thing. But if I throw it at you when you're least expecting it, then it isn't going to land well.
Right. So, I remember I got a gift when I was a kid at Christmas from the people that gave birth to me, and I unwrapped it and I was like, this bloody awful jumper. And I wanted to wrap it back up and give it back. And it's like sometimes we get those gifts, and if we don't seek consent for, would you like a jumper this Christmas, or would you like a pair of socks? And you're like, actually, I'd like a pair of socks. And then that person go, okay, well, here's a pair of socks. Here's something that's going to be useful to you. Yeah.
It's a kind of so much of what I'm hearing as well is this kind of consideration for others.
Yeah.
Just consideration for how other people might be experiencing the situation. Yeah. Consideration in relation to what do you need? What do you need from this, and how can I help you get it? Whilst at the same time, not be, and I guess this would be, I'm stereotyping myself in terms of my gender here, but in a kind of maternal way, there is a tendency for me personally to want to make sure that you're okay. But then when I get home at the end of the day and I think, well, actually, I'm not all right. But I've spent the entire day making sure everyone else is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to remember that, when you get on a plane, when you're about to take off and they do the safety announcements, they tell you in the event of the air pressure in the cabin changing, these masks will fall down. They always tell you to put your own mask on before you help other people. And there's a reason for that. And that's a great metaphor for just being in life in general. And it is your needs are as important as everybody else's. And it's a very simple statement, but it draws our attention to recognizing that I am not more important than you. My time is no more valuable than yours. And the same applies to you, right? Like, and so when we can come together and recognize that we are both whole individuals who both have needs, and it's a negotiation about how to get those needs met, that's when you start to get into that space of psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point you've made in relation to that, the accidental manager, is so pertinent, because there tends to be this assumption that because somebody can get through a recruitment process and a series of interviews and perhaps a psychometric test or two, and then they get a job that's got manager in the title, then automatically they know how to lead people. And the leadership skills that people need when they go from doing a role without a team of direct reports into one that has is so critical. Mm-hmm. But quite often, well, you've got the job, so therefore you must be able to do it. And that's a great opportunity for us to tell the audience that you've got a new book coming out in September as well. So there you go. Leadership is a behaviour, not a title. Do you like how I did that? That was seamless. 27th of September. So the second book coming out, which I can't wait to read. There's some really rich and valuable stuff coming out of this discussion, and as always, where I start to feel like, we just haven't got enough time because there's so much stuff that needs to come out. We're trying to be very focused in this discussion in relation to which areas we're covering, and it's time to move into the slot where I've asked Alex to. I think how it was positioned on the invitation to the webinar was a strategic session, but essentially what I've asked Alex to do is to share with us all his experience as Managing Director of Scotland's Railway. There is some great stuff happening in Scotland, some really amazing stuff. Even if you just look at the website and the coverage that diversity and inclusion and belonging gets on the ScotRail website, which is quite different. There's information there about different aspects of diversity. There's the kind of the stuff that the organisation's doing around the menopause, for example, around encouraging disabled colleagues to take part fully in the organisation, amongst all of the other different areas that we're discussing. So, Alex, I'm going to hand over to you for the next kind of 10 minutes or so to talk to us about your own experience as a leader within the rail industry, an industry which has got quite a long way to go in terms of diversity and what we look like, and certainly a long way in terms of belonging. Tell us about your experience and what's working well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nina. So I'll sort of waffle on for a few minutes, and hopefully that will take us into some interesting areas. I mean, as the leader of ScotRail and Network Rail in Scotland, I believe that the railway is for everybody, whether that is a customer or a potential customer or indeed a colleague. And if you look at the diversity of our workforce, it doesn't match the diversity of our customers, and I believe that's a big problem. So I think that if we can create a workplace where everyone can be their wonderful individual self rather than just a resource to be deployed, we can deliver a better service to our customers. So, for example, there are lots of people in the rail industry who are overrepresented. And that was the other thing that I loved about DDS's book, is it's saying, white, straight men are not bad people. It's just in some environments, they are overrepresented. And I believe that if we have a workforce which is fully reflective of society, we will be a better business, we'll deliver better customer satisfaction, and will be a better place to work. So here in Scotland, we've got an ambitious target to decarbonise the railway by 2035. And I'm a believer in having big, hairy, audacious goals. And I've said, well, why don't we say that by 2035, we want the workforce of the railway in Scotland to be fully reflective of Scottish population? So we've got 20% female. Why don't we make it, 50% female by 2035? And recently I was at an event with a supplier, and they were all moaning about the skills shortage in their bit of the industry. And I looked out at this sea of, white male faces, and the same people who were moaning about the skills shortage only seemed to be hiring within 50% of the population, i.e. male. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Those two positions are not compatible with each other. I've got a bit of a sort of personal diversity inclusion story, which morphs into a corporate one, and I'd like to share a little bit of that with you. So I'm a gay man. I'm married to Johnny, and when I graduated from Leeds University, I spent the next 15 years working and living in London, which of course is one of the most diverse cities in the world. And it was in London in my 20s and 30s where I came to terms with my sexuality, and I had boyfriends, and I told my family and my friends. And it was only in 2013 when I returned to the north of England to be the managing director of Northern Rail, when I realised there was actually a geographical element to diversity inclusion in Britain. Because when I met my PA for the first time, she asked me what my wife did. And I said, well, I don't have a wife. I've got a partner, actually, at the time. And so I had to explain. And one of the things that people, particularly if they've got sort of invisible diverse traits, is they have to explain themselves to people. And that's wrong. DDS talked about the importance of senior leadership and how senior leadership can have a big impact on organisations. And I've been in this job for 5 years, and 4 years ago, my new Network Rail boss, Alex Hynes, came along to meet me for the first time. And I just got married, and we had breakfast together in Edinburgh. And straight off, he said, oh, is that a wedding ring I see on your hand? And I said, yes. And I said, I just got married to my husband, Jonathan, and we talked about what happened and all this sort of stuff. And immediately, he had created a safe space. He did it deliberately. He was telling me that it's okay to be Alex Hynes and all that you are. And I never had to spend any time sussing him out, holding anything back. I was able to bring my full self to work from the first day of his tenure as chief executive. And that's what inclusive leadership is all about. It's about valuing and caring for each and individual person rather than treating people as resources to be deployed. And we've done loads of great work for LGBT colleagues here in Scotland. And this has been really interesting because when I moved to Scotland 5 years ago, if I was having dinner with my husband in a restaurant, people started saying to me, oh, do you want to pay for it all on one card? And I was thinking, oh, this is a bit strange. And it was only afterwards I realised that homosexuality in Scotland wasn't decriminalised until 1981, which I just find absolutely incredible. And one of the things that has proven to be really, really effective at helping diversity, inclusion and belonging is creating spaces where people can have a cuppa and a chat but only with people who've got lived-in experience of that particular characteristic. So here in Scotland, we'll have employee cuppa and chats for people who are LGBT. And in Scotland, I've been really shocked. People have literally been coming out of the closet. They've spent their entire railway careers being closeted, going through life on a don't ask, don't tell basis, which actually is really sad. And, people have said, God, crikey, I've been on the railway for 37 years, and here I am talking about LGBT History Month with my line manager and my line manager's line manager, and God, this is incredible. So I think the further you get from London, the harder you have to work on this agenda, because, of course, London has lots of issues. I'm not pretending it's Disney, but it is relatively diverse. So people are much more up to speed with this agenda. The further you get away from London, and I think it's harder for people because there is less diversity. One of the things that I've been really fortunate to experience is a reverse mentor. And one of the things we do when we do reverse mentoring is make sure we get paired up with someone with lived experience which you haven't had yourself. So I'm a gay white man, and one of my reverse mentors was a white menopausal female. And she reverse mentored me for over 12 months. And to say it was an eye-opener was an understatement. She had an incredible impact on me, but she's also had an incredible impact on the quality of life for women in ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland. So we now have menopause cafes in ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland. So people who are menopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, worried about menopause can talk about it. And one of the things that I find most shocking, actually, was some of the experiences that menopausal women had been through at work, which I just thought were awful. And for me, I should know this, but I didn't. Not all women go through childbirth, but all women go through the menopause. It's often not talked about. And, often people have this perception of the menopause of, like a Les Dawson sketch, the women's problems type thing. And actually, I used to say to my reverse mentor, well, hang on, why is there a stigma about this stuff? When every woman experiences it, why is there a stigma? This is ridiculous. And so I hope that one of the things that her reverse mentoring of me and the fact that we've set up these menopause cafes is we can help people, it's no wonder we were struggling to attract women into our workforce when, we don't provide the support and the help we need for menopausal women, which, for me is just a reminder that we sadly do live in a man's world, and it's nice to see this talked about in other sectors. My current reverse mentor is a member of the BAME community who's actually in the UK on a work visa. And obviously, they're not easy to come by. They're arranged by their employer, and I've just found it really interesting talking to him about the anxiety he feels because he's over here with his family and his children, and when he sees the mobile number of the person in HR who deals with the work visa flashing up in his mobile phone. For him, it's a real source of fear. And of course, as a white guy, this is not an experience I've ever had to worry about. And I just think that if we spend more time walking in other people's shoes, we can create places to work where people can bring their full self to work, do their best, but also deliver great services to customers as well. I've waffled on a bit there. There's a bit of LGBT, there's a bit of menopause, and now I'm exploring BAME. But I believe that the railway is for everybody, and by God, we have got a long, long way to go until it is.
Yeah, Alex, that you have met your brief perfectly. I asked you to share as much as you were prepared to in terms of your own personal story, but also to give our audience some practical advice of stuff that's happening in your organisation, and you have done that beautifully. I am going to confess to feeling quite emotional when you hear about some of this stuff that people go through, and I don't have that same lived experience as you've had. I have different, obviously. I've got my stuff going on, but just being able to share. And I'm kind of coming back to that intentionally brave space concept that DDS alluded to before. It's this feeling that we can talk about this stuff, whatever it is, even women's problems. We can talk about them on a webinar with people from the UK transport industry. DDS, we are going to move to a short comfort break before we come back and kind of home in on some recruitment specific advice. Is there anything, having listened to Alex, I really want to give you the opportunity to respond to that before we disappear off for the short comfort break.
I'll be really quick. I just want to acknowledge also how emotional I felt listening to Alex about what you're creating for your employees. Alex, it's incredible. It truly is. And to hear you talk about your learnings and your growth, what an amazing role model. And I didn't know any of this, it's just I just want to say thank you. I'm not even a member of staff, and I want to say thank you for creating what you're creating, or at least, I know you have a team that will be helping you with this, but you enable this as the person that sits at the top of the org chart. You enable this to happen. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Second that. And I know everybody, we've got some really positive feedback in the chat as well, Alex. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to invite you to both take a short comfort break, and we're going to reconvene again in 8 minutes, 15:40. And we've got a discussion around some recruitment best practice. I've got a couple of questions that I'm keen to get your take on. And then we're going to move into the live question and answer session. So I know that Caroline and our marketing team have been pulling some questions together. So we're ready for those, but please do, if you've got any questions at all that you want to put to our special guest today, please put them into the chat and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. In the meantime, I'm going to stop talking. I'll let you take your comfort break, get the kettle on, do whatever else happens in a comfort break. I'll see you back at 15:40. Thank you.
Thank you.
But we are back in the room. Welcome back to our audience and to DDS and Alex. Thank you again for joining us. We have got some questions. We've got some brilliant questions, actually, and I'm really looking forward to putting those to you both in 20 minutes or so. But we did promise our audience as part of today's webinar that the key theme was going to be practical advice. And one of the areas, and Alex, you alluded to this in your example earlier, I do hear quite often the story that there is a skills shortage. We know that organisations are finding it difficult to attract talent. That's not just in the UK transport sector or within rail, it's across the whole of the UK. People have changed the way that they want to live and work as a result of what they've gone through personally in the global pandemic. So we've had the great resignation. We've had people who've decided that actually they didn't like the way they were treated by their employer during the pandemic, so they're off. And different organisations now insisting that people come back to work 5 days a week in the office. and people are voting with their feet on that one as well. Although, you know, there's a whole different webinar around remote working and hybrid, etc., and what the pros and cons. But I would really love to focus the next 20 minutes or so in terms of talent pipelining. So how do we attract people into the UK transport sector from underrepresented communities? What do organisations need to do? So I guess first and foremost, if I can come to DDS, you give us some amazing practical examples in the book. Can you share perhaps your favourite or the first ones that come to mind? What are the really good recruitment practices that you have seen in organisations that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, I think philosophically it's really important to start with 3 questions, which is where are you advertising, how are you selecting, and who is interviewing? You know, the first job of creating a diverse pipeline is making sure that the people that are so-called diverse hires are even able to be aware that there are jobs to be recruited into. And oftentimes I hear people say, well, I'm using LinkedIn, that goes to everyone. And I think you shared with me, Nina, that there was a powerful stat the other day that only 53% of the workforce are on LinkedIn. So there's 47% of the workforce already not being reached via LinkedIn. And even if you are advertising on LinkedIn, then we know that the big tech companies like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, they all have their algorithms that will mean that only certain ads get served to certain people. So the first piece of advice would be really understanding, getting your recruitment selection team, your talent acquisition team, whatever it is that you call them, to really think about those sources. Where are you searching for talent? Where are you advertising? And are you putting the ads in front of people that you want to attract? Second of all is, how are you selecting? And so there's some really, you know, we can't escape, you know, the phrase unconscious bias was very much a buzzword for a while. And I think it's really important to understand that you know, unconscious biases play out in our life in unconscious ways. That's why they're called unconscious biases. And our biases arise from the training and conditioning we receive as a young person by our family, by the media, by the church we go to, by the school that we go to. And they affect our perceptions and the way in which we look at the world at an unconscious level. The question isn't whether unconscious bias is at play. The question is, how is my unconscious bias at play? And what we need to do in recruitment processes is to remove the margin of error that can be caused by our unconscious biases. So an example would be having hiring managers review resumes or CVs or applications that remove names, because we know from research that there is bias that creeps in based off of someone's name. Does it sound like a white name? Does it sound like a male name? Or does it sound like something else? And that can be one level of influence. The same with addresses or cities. The same with schools that people went to. And there can be a real bias towards people that did or didn't go to university. And if they did go to university, which university did they go to? Because actually what really matters in recruitment is, does this person have the knowledge and the skills to be able to do the job in which they will become experienced in doing? And so removal of any other data other than skills, knowledge, and experience is a way to remove that bias that is at play. And then we go to this space of who is running the interviews. And are you running an interview panel? Is a candidate going to be put in front of the same person throughout the recruitment process? Are there different recruiters that are used? And whatever the approach is that you decide to use and to deploy, is making sure that there is diversity wired into the interview panel or the interview team. So those would just be some examples.
Perfect. Thank you. Completely agree, as you would expect me to, in the terms of where do you advertise. On occasion, and quite often actually during last year, when the candidate market was moving quite a lot, and certainly in 2020, when the aviation industry, for example, had made a lot of people redundant, and the rest of the transport industry was benefiting from that, because there were some really cracking candidates out there who were looking for jobs, and so therefore they were on LinkedIn, they were checking out the different train operating companies' websites, for example, or following them on LinkedIn. But actually, it's not a captive audience that we've got. We have to be. Many of you who will know me will know that I am an absolute evangelist for the rail industry. But there are not, believe it or not, there are not a queue of people out there all desperately beating our door down to come and work with us in the rail industry or in the transport industry. So we've got to get cleverer in terms of where we're looking and can really think about how do we access these different communities, and we don't just keep going and fishing in the same pond. There are lots of different ponds that we can go to. I think the how do you select? You've made such a pertinent point, DDS, around this kind of what's sometimes known as blind CVs. So taking the name off, taking the address off. The date of birth went a few years ago now, so that's that doesn't need to be on, obviously. But you can still work that out if somebody said when they went to school. Obviously, it's not difficult to work out. We've been working with the Rail Delivery Group for some years now, and they changed their process a couple of years ago into application forms which take off all of the references to the years that they've worked for different organisations. For example, it wouldn't say 1982 to 1987, it would say 5 years at that organisation. And they're having some really good results with that. Yeah. And I think, the point is really well made in relation to let's focus on skills, knowledge and experience. There was a report that came out via City AM, I think it was last week, possibly the week before, and it was a study that had been done into blind CVs, or anonymising CVs is probably a better term for it. The recruitment of black people increased by 79% when the process was anonymised, and it was skills-based versus your old kind of send a cover letter, let's do a group task, let's ask you to do a presentation. 79%.
Staggering.
It's absolutely staggering, isn't it? So really, really relevant point. Can I come back to the unconscious bias challenge that we have? There are various different schools of thought here in relation to whether unconscious bias training is worth its salt. What's your view on that?
Well, look, I've had a 25-year career before I set up my business. 25 years in learning and development, org psych, org development roles. I did a post after I did my bachelor's degree. I did a postgraduate certificate in adult education. So I've been in training and learning my entire career. Still am. I think there's a really, really big problem with calling slide presentations training. Right? It is not training. Particularly, it is presentation and it is information giving. So when we run necessary, the e-learning slides that you click through and you do a little quiz at the end, really, really important. But I want to stress they are really great at information giving if the person on the other end of the mouse is paying attention, right? Because I know, because I've been there myself when I had to do, the annual training that you do every year that you refresh. Sometimes, like, let it play in the background while I'm doing my emails or watching EastEnders or whatever it is, right? Like, so these things that are often, or the unconscious bias trainings that are often kind of pushed out into organizations, I think the word training attached to them is a very, very loose definition of the term. They are unconscious bias information giving sessions. They are unconscious bias presentations. When you take that information into a discussion about how these biases can play out in the workplace and in relationship, that's when learning starts to happen. And it's only when learning starts to happen that you can call an event a training. Yeah. Other than that, it's a presentation. So that is my very, very specific hobby horse, personal thing that I have about those types of trainings.
Perfect. I would ask at this point, the audience, so people who are tuned in, if you have taken part in any learning that's around unconscious bias that you feel has been successful and has had a good result, can you pop it in the chat, please? Because I would love to know about it. DDS, you've given us 3 really great questions and you've kind of put some information around there. I'm going to come to Alex in relation to so what DDS has shared with us already in relation to where do you advertise, how are you selecting, and who is interviewing. Again, from a practical application point of view, what else do you want to add?
So I think they're all great. I would build on that, and I would say, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? And for me, the outcome that I would like to achieve is I would like a workforce which is fully reflective of the communities that we serve. So TfL do this. TfL measure the diversity of London. They measure the diversity of their workforce, and then they say our workforce is 60% reflective. Yeah. So diversity is different in different places, isn't it? London's more diverse than Scotland. So you wouldn't expect the Scottish workforce to be as diverse as London, for example. But, if we don't do this, we will be told to do it. The Mayor of London recently told the Met Police that they had to be 15% BAME. I think I'm right in thinking London is 15% BAME. So he wasn't asking the Met Police to be anything special. He just wanted the police force to be fully reflective with London's diversity. And so if we don't do this, we will be told to do it. Mm. And some people can't even see the issue. So, I've had people say to me, oh, here's a picture, Alex, of the new apprentices. Look at this, isn't it fabulous? And they'll all be sort of white men. And I go, isn't there something missing from that picture? Some people literally can't see it. Yeah. They can't see it. I've lived and worked in London, so I've got a different experience than someone who's always lived and worked in Scotland. And so you do have to educate. And when I was at the Office of Rail and Road, as it's now called, we did diversity training. I personally found it really helpful because, for example, one of the things I learned is that, it's a natural instinct to not always, feel completely 100% comfortable with people who aren't like you, because it's a survival instinct. Human beings are tribal, and actually it does require conscious effort to overcome all those biases which are a function of the way you're wired and the way you've been brought up, which of course is so incredibly different from the way everyone else has been brought up. And it was interesting what you said, Nina, there about, you get home and you think, crikey, I've spent all day looking after everyone else, but what about me? This is a gross generalization, but females at work are more selfless than men, right? That is a generalization. Yeah. But one of the things that I've realised since the 23rd of March 2020, when we all started working at home and on Teams and stuff, and we all put the yellow hand up, don't we, because we want to come in at some point. But sometimes we just put the yellow hand up to log the fact we want to come in. We don't necessarily want to come in now. Women will often say, "Oh, Alex, would you like to come in there?" And it's, no, it's fine. I'm happy to wait. Men never give way to women. So here's an example of a new environment, which was all completely new to us on the 23rd of March, but our unconscious wiring is leading to this sort of gendered behaviour, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm fed up with incrementalism. I want big, hairy, audacious goals. I want to be fully reflective of society. I do want 50% of the workforce to be female by 2035 or whenever we achieve it. How do we know how we're going to get there? No, not sure. Have we thought of all the practical implications? No, not really. But actually, often HR departments are quite resistant in this area. They don't want to set targets. Obviously, we positive action is allowed, positive discrimination less so. But for example, I've said, right, why don't we make sure every interview panel is gender balanced? And someone said to me, the problem with that, Alex, is the women would spend all their time interviewing. They wouldn't do any work. And you're thinking, that is the point. Unless you do something different and totemic, you're always going to carry on recruiting people who are overrepresented in your workforce. Yeah. So when I go to a headhunter, I say, right, I want a gender balanced shortlist. And you can see the look on their face. They think, oh, shit, that means we're going to have to work really hard on this commission. Because actually, what I wanted to give you was the folder of 20 white male guys in their 50s. But actually, no, I'm going to have to earn my fee. And, with the COO ScotRail recruitment, we had a gender balanced shortlist. We gave the job to the best candidate, a female leader from outside the rail industry, and she's bringing fresh thinking into our industry, which is brilliant. So if you are not gender balanced recruiting, why aren't you gender balanced recruiting? Because if you're not, you are missing out on all this talent. You are missing out on the ability to be a better place to work. You are missing out on the ability to deliver a better service to your customers.
Absolutely, and I need to. So I'll come from a personal perspective first. We don't say "oh shit" when you ask for a diverse shortlist. We say "yes, fantastic, we'd love to work with you." One of the things that clients often say is, well, when we're talking about you need to have a diverse panel, but we haven't got anybody. We haven't got anybody from the Black or Asian ethnic minority group on the senior team. We don't have any women on the senior team. We don't have anyone from the LGBTQ community on the senior team. And my response always to that is, why do they need to be on the senior team?
Brilliant.
If you've got people within your organisation who represent different areas of diversity, bring them onto your interview panel. They don't have to be an executive director of the organisation. And actually, there's a really strong argument to say that you should be doing this anyway. Get your frontline people there interviewing the future leaders of the organisation.
And Nina, I would add to that as well, and I see this starting to happen so often. People who have what Alex described earlier as invisible, diverse identities, but even those that have visible, diverse identities. So anyone who is Black or Asian or Middle Eastern, from an ethnic group, anyone that is from the LGBTQ plus community, anyone that is neurodiverse, and anyone that is a woman. So oftentimes, if they're not on the leadership team, then they get brought in, they get wheeled in to be the voice of the entire community, having had a lived experience most of their life, or if not all of their life, of being marginalized or oppressed or excluded. And now all of a sudden they're being asked to give even more emotional labor. And so if we are, organizations out there, if we are relying on these people who aren't in leadership positions, who are on the front line to do additional work, then bloody well pay them. It is as simple as that.
Yeah.
Give them stipends, give them bonuses, raise their hourly rate. If we're asking them to do additional emotional labor, let's pay them for what they're doing.
Absolutely. And you make the point in the book about this as well in terms of employee networks, that it's these employee networks are working really, really well. So the Archway employee network that they mentioned earlier, there are 6 different employee networks, I think, at Network Rail. I know other organisations within the transport industry have got them. But you do have to be aware that people can't do such an important role on top of their already important role without that being recognised.
Yep.
And there needs to be a budget, and there needs to be an allowance of time, and there needs to be executive sponsorship, doesn't
Yep.
there? So there's some kind of the best practice stuff around this. I caught sight of a comment from Dawn Badminton Caps in the chat just then when, in relation to what I've just suggested in bringing people on to interview panels, and Dawn saying, well, surely that there should be people on the executive team, and yes, absolutely, Dawn, there should be, absolutely, completely, but there isn't. So we are where we are, and we've got to start making things look different. And it's all very well and good recruiting for diversity. HR and talent acquisition teams are working harder than they've ever done to recruit a diverse workforce. But if we're bringing people into an organisation where there is no diversity, then not only are we fishing in the talent pool for diverse workforce, but we're also looking within that for pioneers, for people who are prepared to be the first person of colour, the first gay man, the first gay woman, whatever it is in that organisation. And that's a different kettle of fish altogether when we're asking people to be the first and not to come and join an organisation which already welcomes diversity. So my goodness, so much to go at here. I just want to throw one more thing into the pot, if I may, before we move on to questions, which is a kind of a bit of a personal soapbox topic for me. Pay what the role is worth. We are frequently asked, as when we're presenting candidates, what salary are they on now? What difference does it make? What is the role worth? What do you want to pay the right candidate to perform this role to the standard that you want them to perform it to? Because if we start looking at what they're earning now, your gender pay gap is never going to close. Believe me, it just won't. And we see this so often. And people say to me, why won't clients tell you? Why won't they advertise and put a salary on it, put a salary on the advert? That's why, because too many organisations are still asking, what's the candidate earning now? I'm off my soapbox. I'm going to start off with the questions. We've got a cracking question from our lovely Heather Waugh up in Scotland. DDS says it's important for leaders to create an environment where employees can offer opinion or criticism without fear of consequence. Alex is a very natural people person who has enough self-confidence to genuinely hear people so he can create this environment. Is this something that can be taught to current MDs or CEOs, etc.? How can people who don't have that produce these results? Cracking question, Heather. Thank you so much for contributing. DDS, over to you.
I would agree that Alex does have self-confidence, and it's a thing that shines from the inside out. I don't know this to be true, but I would imagine this to be partly true, that Alex has worked on that through his life to be able to be at a place where I'm okay, you're okay. And so I do believe that self-confidence is a trainable, acquirable experience, if you want it to be. And it starts there, right? It starts in a place of self-awareness and then moves to a place of self-acceptance. and then moves to a place of self-development. And so if you want to build your ability to give and receive feedback, and if that does rest on a platform of self-confidence, which I believe it does as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist, I believe it does, then the first place, excuse me, excuse me.
Do you have? I feel like I want to pass you a glass of water, but my arms are not long enough.
But it starts with I want to develop my self-confidence.
Yeah. So the will has to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, what's your response to Heather's question?
Well, you see, Heather only knows me relatively recently, yeah? So her perception of me as a leader will be different from people who've known me for longer. So I think that I can be me because I bring my full self to work, yeah? So I think I'm a little mini case study myself about how I can be a better leader if I bring my full self to work.
Yeah.
The other issue is that, you know, I'm paid to make stuff better, right? Whether it's punctuality, safety, performance, productivity, efficiency, you know, it's about making stuff better, isn't it? And as DDS has just said, I am committed to me being a better leader. And there have been loads of examples where I've been a terrible leader and had a negative impact on people or organisations. But I've been working on it for a long time, and hopefully I'm trying to get better over time. But also, you know, I surround myself with a really strong team. And the Alex you see, actually a lot of it comes from the people I surround myself with, yeah? So, you know, it's not unusual for someone to say to me, oh, Alex, have you said thank you to those people? You know, I'll give you a list of names. Yeah. These are all the people you need to thank, type thing. And so it's not, you know, teamwork is really important here because we all have, you know, different skills, don't we? And, you know, some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, some people are thinkers, some people are feelers. So part of organisational success is having that really nice mix. So, for example, you said to me today, oh, I've been on the ScotRail website and it talks about equality and inclusion and belonging. And, you know, that's brilliant. Well, I didn't even know that. And while I was having a sandwich, I started looking through the ScotRail website because I already work here. I don't need to. So you know, Leanne, who's on this call, who looks after ED&I for ScotRail, all you've got to do is set people off in the right direction. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
create an environment where people can do their best work.
We're back to the trust thing again, aren't we? We're back to this thing where a leader has built a level of trust within the team, within the team in its biggest sense, to say you are completely empowered to bring your whole self to work, to be the person, the youest you, as DDS refers to in the book, which I think Dr. Seuss also refers to, the youest you that you can be, bring that to work and love the work you do, be in flow because you're doing work that's meaningful to you as an individual. You're being allowed to be yourself. And that in itself produces confidence. Because, you know, we kind of see this, I've seen this in my own teeny tiny organisation where people have joined the team and you can see it, it's tangible, it's amazing seeing them just develop and grow and take on more responsibility and have bigger conversations. It's just an absolute joy to see it.
Well, self-efficacy is what Albert Bandura, behavioral psychologist from many moons ago, said is the most important ingredient to self-confidence, right? And self-efficacy can be built through vicarious experiences, i.e. observing other people do something. It can be built through direct experience, i.e. I'm doing something and I'm getting better at it. And it can also be built by other people mirroring back to you praise or recognition. And so all of those things become important in the workplace if we're trying to not only build our own self-confidence, but build the confidence in others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one more contribution from me before we move on to another question would be that this self-confidence and this growth, there isn't an end game, isn't there? There's no end point. There's no kind of, oh, my goal is to be self-confident and I'm aiming to do that by, 2027.
You don't get to graduate from personal growth.
No, I love that. I love that expression. Yeah, absolutely. It is a lifelong learning curve. And I think the more that we have these type of conversations, the quicker it will happen. And we'll have more people feeling better and feeling more confident. But it's a lifelong exercise. Let's have a look at. Sorry, Alex, crack on.
Sorry to interrupt, but can I just pick up this team thing again? So ScotRail has a fantastic apprenticeship program run by a lady called Margaret Mellon, who's a force of nature, and she was telling me on board a train recently, we bumped each other about the latest apprenticeship program and the fact that we were recruiting neurodiverse people. And there was something in the chat about neurodiversity earlier on. Now, I'm not aware that she asked for permission for that. I'm not aware she wrote some big board paper or anything like that. Because it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to recruit neurodiverse people? Because they've got great talents, and secondly, they're actually part of society. And if you want a workforce that reflects society and your customer base, you need neurodiverse people in it. So that's another example. You just sort of point people off in the right direction and say, that's kind of the direction we're heading. And if it works out, you'll get the credit. And if it doesn't work out, I'll take the blame and just get on with it.
Yeah. This is, by pure coincidence, is our next question. So thank you for leading me nicely into it, Alex. Jenna Clare, thank you, Jenna, for your question. I'll read Jenna's comments first. I see some incredible minds within this industry and think we should be championing that, so we get the very best from everyone regardless. But I often see this, neurodiversity, as an area we need to do better as an industry. So Jenna's question: what are the thoughts on neurodiversity as opposed to the usual diversity elements? So DDS, can I pass that question to you in the first instance, and then we'll come back round to Alex to continue.
Neurodiversity, I think, is often, well, there's a couple of things going on. I think it in part relates to what Alex called the invisible diverse identities, but it also I think there's something, and I'm speaking to this with my licensed psychotherapist hat on. There's a book called the Diagnostic Statistic Manual that is produced by the American Psychiatric Association, that is generally considered to be the world's authority on all of the so-called mental disorders that exist and all of the diagnoses. I take offense slightly to, first of all, the word disorder. And the other thing that I have a very complex relationship with diagnoses. I understand that they are important to some people and enable treatment and medication. And I also understand that diagnosis can be harmful and can pathologize people in very unuseful ways. One of the challenges that I think exists at a world level, at least in kind of the Western world, is that neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism and ADHD exist in the DSM. They are identified as mental disorders, which means they come with the stigma that everything like schizophrenia or bipolar or anxiety or depression come with. And so we don't like to talk about it, particularly as British people. You know, we want to talk about tea and we want to talk about the weather. We don't want to talk about feelings and experiences. And so all of that stuff goes underground, but it's there. It exists. And so as long as we have this stigma that is associated with neurodivergence, I mean, even the word, I know it's the word we use, but neurodivergence is saying that there's something weird and wrong about people that have neurodevelopmental needs that are different to the overrepresented groups in our life.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on about the challenges that exist with this, but it starts for me with the need to destigmatize, just like ScotRail did with the menopause. Like, let's destigmatize this stuff and realize that there are people walking around amongst us that have different neuro needs than many other people.
Are there any and I appreciate I'm just dumping this on you as a question. Are there any best practices that you've seen, DDS, in terms of organisations who have been particularly effective at attracting people into the organisation who think differently?
Well, it really starts with what you shared about ScotRail's website, right? So the first thing that anybody is going to do when they're considering it being employed by an organization is they're going to look at the website. They might even look at Glassdoor and see what employees are saying about working there. They might ask their friends if they know anyone that works there. And then they might also go on to LinkedIn. So all of these places are your shop window. So it's your opportunity to demonstrate why it is safe for those people to people with different identities and social locations to come and work here. And then you've got to back that up with policy and process that supports individuals. Like there is nothing more disappointing to me as a queer person. Every June, all of these brands slap a rainbow on their logo and go, yay, pride, and try and get the pink pound coming their way. And then you look underneath the bonnet, you pull back the curtain, they have zero policies that support the queer community. They have zero representation of queer people on their boards. In fact, they probably don't even have an LGBT person making the decisions about what type of logo and what type of rainbow should be on the logo, right? It's about first of all having the shop window that is going to attract people, and then having the organizational infrastructure that means when they do get a job in your organization that they are supported to stay there and to be able to do their job in the most effective way. Yeah,
thank you. Alex, have you got anything to add in terms of the neurodiversity question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have customers in the rail industry who are neurodiverse. There are neurodiverse people in society, so why wouldn't you want them in your workforce? And actually, we already have neurodiverse people in our workforce. This is about making it a conscious thing. So, you know, people joke about certain professions in the rail industry and says that, you know, they attract a certain type of person. I won't label any of those roles, but if you take a railway timetable, that's about patterns and numbers, right? Some people love patterns and numbers. Sometimes that's a neurodiverse trait. So why don't you go and proactively seek out that skill? Yeah. And I think the other thing is, in the context of ScotRail now being in the public sector, Network Rail having been in the public sector for some time now, we consume vast sums of public subsidy. It's important that we work for the public. If you're neurodiverse, you should be able to have a rewarding career just as someone who isn't, not be left on the sort of scrap heap of society. So, a pound spent with Scotland's Railway should be a pound spent for good. And if that means giving rewarding careers to everybody in society, no matter who you are, where you come from, that is one of our purposes.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that. I'm going to come to a question now, which I think will probably be our last question. But as I said earlier, we've got some cracking questions. We will feed these back as part of our follow-up communication. So if your question hasn't been answered, then please bear with us. But this one feels like a good one to end the Q&A on. It's from Alex Hynes at First Bus. And Gareth is new to the rail industry. But Gareth's question: I have spoken with some who find it difficult to comprehend that you can truly belong in an organisation. Mm-hmm. Now, that might be that they have yet to find their organisation, or perhaps they are sceptical that such an emotionally charged behavioural utopia can be achieved. How can we supercharge the formula to deliver this for everyone? Cracking question, Gareth. Thank you. DDS, let's start with you.
That's a bloody marvellous question.
Isn't it?
I think one of the things that we're dealing with from a societal perspective is the legacy of work and non-work don't meet, right? And so we're often told, keep your dirty linen at home, don't bring your problems to work, leave your emotions at the door. Those are messages that we receive from our parents, and our parents receive from their parents. And those are often messages that we might experience at work as well. When somebody says, well, they're too emotional. I'm like, I nearly swore then. Newsflash, everyone is emotional. Like, we're human, right? And so I think part of that idea of is that emotional utopia, is it too far out of reach? We've got to break down the idea that people can't bring their full selves to work anyway. And part of that is to do with our social conditioning. And psychologically speaking, it's problematic when we try to split ourselves. When we split ourselves, this is the work me and this is the non-work me. First of all, that takes an inordinate amount of psychological energy to be able to uphold. So it's exhausting for you as an individual. It's also problematic psychologically when we try to divide ourselves into two halves. So it takes work because we're not used to doing it, and because we've been trained and told that we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, that is such a good response. There's so much I want to unpack there, and I can't because I've got an eye on the clock. Alex, do you want to comment on Gareth's question?
I'm not an expert in belonging. DDS is, and if you haven't read his book, I recommend you read it. But for me, belonging is about sort of feeling at home, isn't it? And when you're at home, you generally might feel comfortable in your surroundings. And I guess the question which is worthwhile asking is, when I entered the office today, did I leave a little bit of me outside? Or did I bring all of Alex Hynes to work? And I brought all of Alex Hynes to work. And I think that makes me a better leader. It also makes me a lot happier because I don't have to expend energy on trying to create this difference between the personal Alex Hynes and the professional Alex Hynes. And I think that's really important that people like me role model that.
Absolutely, completely agree. There's so much in here, and I could keep talking. As you probably both know, I could keep going for a while yet. But we've promised people we will finish at 4:30. And I know, Alex, I know you've got another meeting straight after this one, so I will do my thank yous as quick as I possibly can. But speed does not mean nonetheless heartfelt. My huge thanks to both of you for joining us today. I think what you've shared and the way that you've shared it has been incredible. I think it's been honest. It's been just there it is. What you see is what you get. It's encouraged people to be able to have these types of conversations. I am hugely grateful to you both. I'm really grateful to the audience as well for joining us. We've had a really great number of people. I'd like to spread the word further if we can. I'd like to challenge you all to share just one learning. Share as many as you like, but at least one. If you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Twitter, whatever social media page you follow, I would love you to share one thing that you've got from today's session. Tag Intuitive Talent Solutions in it. We will collate them. We can share it. I'm sure that Alex and DDS would love you to follow them on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, so you can see more amazing stuff. I'm going to wave this at you again. You can be yourself here. It is available on audio as well as in written format. And DDS's next book is coming out on the 27th of September, which is called Leadership is a Behaviour, Not a Title. I can't wait to get my hands on that. We're running a third, and so this was a series of 3 webinars. Our third and final webinar, our knowledge session for 2022, is going to be in the autumn, and it will be we'll be joined by Amit Chandarana, who is the lead director of Great British Railways Transition Team, and Amit is again, like Alex has done today, is very open in terms of his own lived experience and what he has experienced as he's gone through his career in the transport industry, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you all. The link to today's webinar will be on our website over the next couple of days. Everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive a link. If you want to share that on your social media, I'd be hugely grateful, so we can let as many people know as possible about the great conversations that we've had and the thought process that's been started today. Huge thank you from me to you for joining us this afternoon. I really do appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.